It was one of those quiet Saturday afternoons in late October, the kind where the sun hangs low and golden, slipping through the half-open blinds like it's trying to remind you the day isn't over yet. The house was empty. Mark had taken the truck to run some errands, which usually meant grabbing coffee with his old college buddies and coming home 3 hours later with a grin and a half-eaten bag of donuts. I didn't mind. 22 years of marriage, and I still liked the silence when he was gone. It felt safe. I decided to finally tackle the attic. We'd been talking about it for months, clearing out the junk, maybe turning it into a little reading nook or a guest space. I pulled the ladder down, the old wood creaking like it was complaining, and climbed up into that familiar smell of dust and forgotten summers. Boxes of Christmas decorations, my mom's old china we never used, Mark's high school football trophies gathering cobwebs. I was humming along to whatever playlist was on my phone, wiping sweat off my forehead, feeling productive for the first time in weeks. That's when I saw it. Tucked way in the back, behind the pink fiberglass insulation that itched just looking at it, was a wooden box I didn't recognize. Not one of ours. It was small, maybe the size of a shoebox, dark oak with these little brass hinges that look expensive. Someone had sealed it with that thick brown packing tape, the kind that sticks forever. There was no label, no name, nothing. Just a thin layer of dust on top that told me it hadn't been touched in years. I don't know why I didn't just leave it there. Something about the way it was hidden, like it was shoved back on purpose, made my stomach do this weird little flip. I told myself it was probably old tax stuff or something boring Mark forgot about. But my hands were already moving, pulling it out, brushing off the dust. The tape peeled away with that satisfying rip sound, and the lid came up easier than I expected. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like old perfume mixed with paper that had been closed up too long. Then the letters. Dozens of them, tied with a faded blue ribbon, handwritten envelopes, the ink a little smudged but still perfectly clear. The name on the front wasn't mine. Emily. I knew one Emily, Mark's old friend, before we met. He'd mentioned her maybe twice in 22 years, always with this quick laugh like it was nothing. Yeah, Emily, we dated for like 5 minutes in college. Ancient history. That's all he ever said. My fingers went cold as I opened the top letter. Mark, I still think about that night in Seattle. It started. My eyes scanned down the page faster than my brain could keep up. Words like, our little boy, and he has your eyes, and I wish you'd stop sending money like that's enough. I sat back on my heels, right there on the gritty attic floor, and felt the air leave my lungs like someone had punched me in the chest. There were photos next. Polaroids, faded but sharp enough to cut. Mark, younger, smiling that same crooked smile I fell in love with, his arm around a woman I'd never seen, and between them, a toddler with dark curls and Mark's exact dimple. I kept digging, my hands shaking now. A tiny hospital bracelet, a birth certificate folded so many times the creases were white. The name on it, Ethan James Carter. Date of birth, June 14th, 2004. 2004. We got married in March 2005. I stared at that paper until the letters blurred. My wedding was still fresh in my mind. White dress, lilies everywhere, Mark looking at me like I was the only woman in the world. And 9 months before that day, he already had a son. There were bank statements too, tucked in the bottom. Monthly transfers, hundreds of dollars, sometimes 1,000, going to an account in Portland every single month for almost 20 years. From our joint checking before we had separate ones. Money I thought was going to investments or that stupid boat he wanted. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? The light outside shifted from gold to gray and I didn't move. My phone buzzed downstairs, probably Mark asking what I wanted for dinner. I couldn't even hear it anymore. But the last item I pulled out at that box made my breath stop altogether. The last thing I pulled from that box was a tiny silver baby rattle, the kind you see in old movies. It still had a faint engraving on the handle. EJC, Welcome to the World, Little Man. The metal was cold against my palm, but it burned worse than anything hot ever could. I just sat there in the darkening attic, holding it, listening to the house settle around me like nothing had changed. But everything had. I ended up carrying the whole box downstairs that night, quiet as a thief, and hid it in the back of my walk-in closet under a pile of winter sweaters Mark never touched. Then I made dinner like a robot, lasagna, his favorite, smiling when he walked in, kissing his cheek like my world hadn't just tilted off its axis. He smelled like coffee and cold air and the same cologne he'd worn since we were 28. "Hey, babe," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind while I stirred the sauce. "Missed you today." I wanted to throw the wooden spoon across the kitchen and scream, "Who are you?" Instead, I leaned back into him and said, "Missed you too." That night, I couldn't sleep. Mark was out cold beside me, snoring softly, like he didn't have a care in the world. Moonlight cut through the blinds and striped the bed, and I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every single memory like an old film reel I suddenly didn't trust anymore. We met in the fall of 2001, both of us 26, at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue in Seattle. I was fresh out of a messy breakup, still licking my wounds, wearing that ridiculous, oversized UW hoodie because I felt safe hiding in it. Mark walked straight up to me, holding 2 beers, and said, "You look like someone who needs a drink and a better playlist." Cheesy, yeah, but his smile was warm and his eyes crinkled at the corners in this way that made you feel seen. 3 hours later, we were sitting on the tailgate of his truck, sharing a bag of kettle corn, talking about everything and nothing. By midnight, he'd kissed me under those string lights, slow and gentle, and I remember thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. He chased me hard after that. Flowers on my desk at the little marketing firm where I worked, voicemails that made me blush in the middle of meetings. He'd show up after my evening yoga class with takeout, and that easy laugh, like making me happy, was the most natural thing in the world. 6 months later, he got down on one knee in the middle of Pike Place Market, right by the fish throwers, ring in one hand and a single white peony in the other. I said yes before he even finished the question. The wedding was small, perfect. My dad walked me down the aisle while Mark stood there looking like he might actually cry. We honeymooned in Maui, lazy days on the beach, nights tangled up in each other, whispering about the house we'd buy, the kids we'd have, the life we were building. He used to trace circles on my back and say, "Sarah, you're my home." I believed him with every cell in my body. But now, lying there in the dark, those memories felt poisoned. Because they were gaps I'd never questioned before, like how he was gone for almost 3 weeks in the summer of 2004 on a work trip to Portland. He came back tanned and quiet, said the project had been brutal. I had just started my new job, was exhausted myself, so I let it go. Or the way he'd sometimes stare off into space on Father's Day, then snap out of it and change the subject real quick. I thought he was just sad we hadn't had kids yet. We'd been trying for 2 years at that point, and the doctors kept saying everything looked fine. I carried that guilt like a backpack full of bricks. If I'd been enough, maybe he wouldn't look so lost sometimes. There were money things too. Early on, before we combined finances completely, he'd get defensive if I asked about certain withdrawals. "It's just helping out an old friend, babe, nothing to worry about." I hated confrontation, hated rocking the boat. So I'd smile and say, "Okay." God, I was so good at saying okay. Even the good stuff started to feel tainted. The way he'd bring me coffee in bed every Sunday without fail, had that been guilt? The surprise weekend getaways when I was stressed at work, covering his tracks? The extra sweet texts when he was working late, because he was actually driving 4 hours to see a little boy who called him dad? I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up to Mark kissing my forehead, already dressed for work. "Early meeting," he whispered. "Love you." "Love you too," I croaked out, tasting the lie like metal in my mouth.
The second he left, I was out of bed, pulling the box from the closet like it was calling my name. I spread everything across the dining room table, letters in one pile, photos in another, bank statements fanned out like evidence at a trial. I made a pot of coffee I didn't drink and just stared at it all until the sun was high in the sky. That's when I noticed the postmarks on the envelopes. Portland, every single one. Some from an E. Carter, others from an Emily Reynolds. Same looping handwriting. The earliest letter was dated August 2003, 4 months before Mark proposed to me. She had written, "I know we're done, but this baby is coming whether you want it or not. He's yours too, Mark. You can't just disappear." My hands shook so hard the paper rattled. There was another one from 2005, right after our wedding. I saw the pictures online. She looks nice. I hope she's good to you. Ethan asked for his daddy again. I didn't know what to tell him. I wanted to throw up. I spent the whole day piecing together a timeline on a legal pad, like some kind of detective. Our first date, his work trips, the months he was distant, the years he was extra attentive. It all lined up in the ugliest way possible. Every sweet moment I'd cherished had a shadow version happening 4 hours south. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to, first steps I never saw. A little boy growing up with my eyes and someone else's last name. By evening, I was a mess. Eyes swollen, throat raw from crying into pillows so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Mark texted he'd be home late. Client dinner. Of course he would. I sat on the couch in the dark, clutching that stupid silver rattle, turning it over and over in my hands. I didn't know it yet, but the cracks had been there from the start. I had just refused to see them.
The days after finding that box turned into a slow-motion nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I'd catch myself standing in the kitchen holding a carton of milk, staring at nothing for 10 minutes at a time. My body was in our house in Bellevue, but my mind was 4 hours south in Portland, trying to picture a little boy who looked just like the man sleeping next to me. I started waking up before the sun, slipping downstairs with my laptop while Mark's breathing was still steady and deep. The first thing I did was Google Emily Reynolds, Portland, Oregon. There were dozens of them, but only one had a photo that made my heart stop. A woman with soft brown hair and tired eyes, smiling in a profile picture next to a teenage boy with Mark's exact jawline. Ethan. He was 17 now. Tall, dark curls, wearing a high school soccer jersey. The caption said, "Senior night with my favorite human." I zoomed in until the pixels blurred, searching that face for pieces of the man I thought I knew. I made a private Instagram account with a fake name and requested to follow her. She accepted 2 days later. And just like that, a whole hidden life opened up in front of me. Birthday posts for Ethan every June 14th, balloons, cake, Mark nowhere in the pictures, but always a mysterious "thank you for everything" comment from an account with no photo and the handle Traveling Dad 88. I clicked it. Private. 0 posts, but the profile picture was the same hiking trail Mark had as his phone wallpaper for years. I felt sick. Actually sick, like I was going to throw up every time I scrolled. The letters were worse. I read them in order, starting with the oldest. Emily begging him to be there when the baby was born, Mark writing back that he couldn't leave Sarah right now. Me. I was the reason he wasn't there. Then later letters, angrier ones, about missed child support, about Ethan asking why his dad only visited twice a year. One from 2015 broke me completely. He cried himself to sleep on Father's Day again. You promised this year would be different. I printed everything. Every bank transfer, every photo, every screenshot. I hid the folder in a locked drawer at work because I didn't trust our house anymore. I tried asking him about it once, gently. We were on the couch watching some dumb Netflix show, his arm around me like any normal Thursday night. I took a breath and said, "Hey, remember that girl Emily from college? Whatever happened to her?" He stiffened, just for a second, but I felt it. Then he laughed too loud. "Emily? God, that was a lifetime ago. Why are you bringing her up?" "I don't know," I said, and keeping my voice light. "Just popped into my head." He shrugged, eyes glued to the TV. "She moved away, lost touch. Ancient history, babe." The lies sat between us like a third person on the couch. That was the first time I truly understood I was living with a stranger. I started watching him differently. The way he'd check his phone and angle the screen away from me. How he'd always take his work calls in the garage. The random Tuesdays he'd say he had to stay late in the city, but his location was turned off. I had spent 22 years trusting this man with my whole heart, and now every memory felt like evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to be part of. One night, I waited until he was in the shower and went through his work bag. There it was, an old burner phone tucked inside a side pocket. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The lock screen was a photo of Ethan at maybe 10 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth. No passcode. I opened the messages. Hundreds of them. "Emily, he made varsity. So proud. Mark, tell him I'm proud too. We'll try to make the next game. Emily, you said that last year. Mark, things are complicated here. Emily, they're always complicated with you." I scrolled back years. Christmas gifts sent late, excuses, promises broken, and underneath it all, Emily never asking for more than he was willing to give, because she already knew he'd never leave me. I sat on the bathroom floor, back against the door, listening to the water run while tears rolled silent down my cheeks. He was singing in there, some old Springsteen song we used to play on road trips. His voice was happy, carefree, like the weight of two families wasn't crushing him at all. That's when I knew I had to find her. I had to hear it from someone who wasn't lying through their teeth. It took me a week to work up the nerve. I created an email address with no trace back to me and wrote the hardest message of my life. "Emily, my name is Sarah Carter. I'm married to Mark. I think we need to talk." I hit send and stared at the screen until it went dark. She responded in less than 5 minutes. I've been waiting 17 years for this email. We set up a call for the next night when Mark went be at his weekly basketball game with the guys. I paced the house for hours, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. When the phone finally rang, I answered on the first ring. "Sarah?" Her voice was soft, a little raspy, kind somehow, not what I expected. "Yeah, hi." A long pause, then, "I'm so sorry." And just like that, I started crying. She told me everything. How they dated on and off in college, how Mark had panicked when she got pregnant, said he wasn't ready but promised he'd step up. How he shown up for the birth, held Ethan for exactly 30 minutes, then disappeared for months. How he'd begged her not to put his name on the birth certificate at first, then quietly added it later when she threatened legal action. How every time she tried to move on, he'd swoop back in with money and apologies and just enough hope to keep her from cutting him off completely. She told me you knew, she said quietly, that you two had an arrangement, that you couldn't have kids, and this was some kind of understanding. I laughed, but it came out broken. "He told me you were ancient history." We were both quiet for a long time. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I just wanted Ethan to have a dad." I believed her. Before we hung up, she sent me a photo. Ethan at his junior prom, standing next to Mark in a tux. They had the same smile, same dimple, same everything. I stared at that picture until 3 in the morning. And then one late night, with my heart pounding louder than the clock on the wall, I found the clue that shattered every last excuse I had made for him.
It was a Thursday night in early November, the kind of cold, drizzly Seattle area night that seeps into your bones. Mark had kissed me goodbye that morning with that same easy smile. Said he had a 2-day conference down in Tacoma and would be home Saturday afternoon. "Don't wait up tonight, babe. We're doing team-building drinks." I nodded, told him to have fun, and watched his taillights disappear down the street like I'd done 1,000 times. Only this time, the second the car turned the corner, I grabbed my keys and drove south on I-5, doing 80 the whole way. I didn't tell Emily I was coming. I couldn't risk her warning him. I just needed to see it with my own eyes, needed the truth to stop feeling like a bad dream I could still wake up from. Their house was in a quiet suburb outside Portland, the kind of neighborhood with basketball hoops in every driveway and Halloween decorations still up. It was a cute 2-story Craftsman, painted soft gray with white trim, porch light glowing warm against the rain. I parked 2 streets over and walked, umbrella low, heart hammering so loud I was sure the whole block could hear it. I told myself I'd just look through a window, just one look at the life he'd kept from me out of. But the universe had other plans. The front door opened right as I reached the edge of their yard. Out stepped Mark, laughing, holding a pizza box in one hand and a 6-pack in the other. Behind him came Ethan, tall and lanky in a hoodie, saying something that made Mark throw his head back and laugh harder. Then Emily appeared, drying her hands on a dish towel, smiling in a way I'd never seen Mark smile at me. Soft, tired, real. She reached up and ruffled Ethan's hair, and he ducked away like any 17-year-old would, but he was grinning. I stood frozen under the streetlight, rain dripping off my umbrella, watching my husband be a dad in a house I didn't know existed. They went back inside. The door closed. The porch light stayed on, like a welcome sign I'd never be invited under. I don't remember the walk back to my car. I don't remember the drive to the cheap motel off the freeway. I only remember sitting on the edge of the lumpy bed at 2 a.m, laptop open, digging deeper than I ever had before. That's when I found the second set of bank accounts. Not just child support, a whole separate life funded behind my back, a college fund for Ethan in both their names, a life insurance policy that listed Emily as primary beneficiary until Ethan turned 25, a safety deposit box in Portland I'd never known about. And the worst one, an entirely separate investment portfolio worth almost $750,000. Money he'd been siphoning from our joint savings, from bonuses, from business expenses for almost 2 decades. I sat there until the sun came up, printing everything at the 24-hour FedEx down the street, page after page of betrayal in black and white. When I got home Saturday morning, Mark was already in the kitchen making pancakes, humming like he hadn't spent the night playing Happy Family 4 hours away. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, nuzzled my neck. "Miss my girl," he murmured. I let him hold me for exactly 5 seconds. Then I stepped away, poured myself coffee, and said, calm as anything, "How was Tacoma?" "Wet. Boring. Same old corporate crap." He flipped a pancake, didn't look up. "You okay? You look tired." "I drove to Portland." The spatula stopped mid-air. "I saw your house, Mark. The gray one? With the porch light? I saw you with Ethan. With Emily." My voice didn't even shake. I was shocked by that. "I know everything." He turned slowly, face draining of color. For the first time in 22 years, Mark Carter had nothing to say. He just stared at me, mouth opening and closing like a fish. I asked, "How long?" "Sarah, how long were you going to let me believe I was your only wife?" He sank into a kitchen chair, head in his hands, and then the excuses started. The same ones Emily had heard for years.
It was a mistake. I was young. I didn't know how to leave her without hurting the kid. I stayed with you because I love you. I was going to tell you, I swear, when Ethan graduated. Every word felt like a slap. I laid the folder on the table between us. Hundreds of pages, bank records, photos, the birth certificate, his real will, the one that left everything to Ethan and Emily if he died before me. He flipped through it with shaking hands, eyes getting wider with every page. Where did you? I said the attic. You got sloppy. Or maybe you wanted to get caught. I don't really care anymore. He started crying then. Actual tears. Begging. Saying he'd end it with them, transfer everything into my name, go to counseling, whatever I wanted. That he couldn't lose me, he was his real family. I just watched him, and for the first time, I didn't feel a thing. That afternoon, Emily called me. I'd left my number in her mailbox the night before, folded inside an envelope with a single sentence. I know now. Call me when you're ready. She was crying too. She kept saying, I didn't know he was still lying to you. God, Sarah, I thought you knew and just didn't want to meet us. He told me you were okay with separate lives, that you couldn't have kids, and this was your way of... I know what? My voice cracked. I was supposed to be okay sharing my husband? Silence. Then she told me the rest. How he'd promised to leave me 12 times over the years. How he'd spent Christmas with them 4 times when he told me he was on mandatory work trips. How he took Ethan to Disneyland for his 10th birthday and posted the photos privately, then told me he was in Denver for a conference. And how he cried in her bed the night he married me, saying he felt like he was making the biggest mistake of his life, but didn't know how to stop the wedding. I hung up and threw up in the kitchen sink. That night I slept in the guest room. Mark sat outside the door for hours, whispering apologies through the wood. I didn't answer. I just laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me shift from devastation to a cold, clear fury I didn't know I was capable of. Because here's the thing they both got wrong. I wasn't broken. I was finally awake. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not the sweet family friend who did our wills, a shark. The kind of woman who eats lying husbands for breakfast. I emailed her everything. She called me back in 20 minutes and said, Sarah, you're not just getting a divorce, you're getting everything. And just like that, the woman who spent 22 years saying okay to whatever Mark wanted started planning the quietest, most devastating revenge of her life. But betrayal was only the beginning, because what came next forced me to choose who I really was.
I didn't scream. I didn't throw his clothes on the lawn or slash his tires like they do in the movies. That would have been too easy for him, too loud, too quick. No, I went quiet, dangerously quiet. The first week after the truth exploded, Mark walked around the house like a ghost who still thought he lived here. He cooked me breakfast I didn't eat, left little notes on the counter. I'm so sorry, babe. I'll fix this. Slept on the couch with his phone clutched to his chest like I might steal it. He kept waiting for the big fight, the tears, the moment I'd break down and let him comfort me back into the lie. But I just looked through him. Spoke only when I had to. Pass the salt. I'm working late. My silence scared him more than any yelling ever could. While he watched me like a kicked dog, I was building a fortress. I met Emily for coffee in a tiny cafe halfway between Bellevue and Portland. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but she still stood up and hugged me the second she saw me. We cried in public. 2 women who'd loved the same liar in completely different ways. Then we dried our tears and got to work. She gave me every scrap of evidence she'd saved for 17 years. Screenshots of texts, hotel receipts from business trips, Birthday cards he'd signed "Love Always, Dad," even a life insurance rider she'd never cashed because it felt wrong. I gave her copies of everything I'd found in our joint accounts. By the time we left that cafe, we weren't victims anymore. We were allies. My lawyer, Rebecca Chen, smiled like a wolf when I handed her the mountain of paperwork. She said, "Washington is a no-fault state, but financial fraud, concealment of assets, and 17 years of intentional deceit, that's not no fault. That's a slaughter." She laid it out cold. I could take the house, the retirement accounts, the hidden investments, and most of his future earnings. And because he'd committed what amounted to bigamy-level deception, even if not legally bigamy, the judge would have zero sympathy. But I wanted more than money. I wanted him to feel what I felt every time I realized another memory was fake. Step 1. I froze every account he could access without my signature, quietly. One Tuesday morning while he was in the shower, I called the banks, gave them the code phrases we'd set up years ago for security. By the time he got to work, his debit card was declined at Starbucks. He texted me, confused. I didn't reply. Step 2. I changed the locks on the house and the code on the garage. Rebecca had the paperwork ready. Temporary sole occupancy order. When he came home that night, his key didn't work. He stood on the porch ringing the doorbell for 20 minutes, calling my name like a lost kid. I watched through the Ring camera, volume off, drinking chamomile tea. Step 3. The job. Mark was regional VP at a big medical supply company, made great money, company car, corner office, the whole package. He loved bragging about his clean record and how everybody trusted him. So I sent his HR department and his boss's boss a very polite, very detailed email from an anonymous address with attachments. Bank records showing he'd used the corporate card for family vacations to Disneyland and Hawaii, vacations I was never on. Expense reports that matched dates he was supposedly in Portland with Ethan while billing the company for hotels in Seattle. And the cherry on top? Photos of him wearing his company polo at Ethan's soccer games, time-stamped during client meetings. They called him in on a Friday, fired him by lunch. The official reason was misuse of corporate funds, but everyone in the industry heard the whispers. His reputation? Gone. 25 years of climbing the ladder, erased in one afternoon. He showed up at the house that night drunk and sobbing, pounding on the door. I called the police. They escorted him away while the neighbors watched from their windows. That video ended up on our community Facebook page by morning. Anyone know this guy? He wouldn't leave the property. Comments poured in. People he golfed with, parents of kids we'd had over for barbecues. The shame hit him harder than any punch. The divorce papers were served to him at his mother's house 3 days later on Christmas Eve. I timed it that way on purpose. Rebecca handed me the tracking confirmation and just said, "Merry Christmas, Sarah." He tried everything after that. Flowers, voicemails that went straight to deleted, showing up at my work until security walked him out, threatening to tell my family I was crazy and vindictive. I saved every text, every email, added it to the file Rebecca kept growing. Emily and I kept talking. She filed for back child support he'd forgotten to pay for years. The judge garnished his severance before he even saw it. Ethan, poor kid, was furious. At his dad, not at me. He sent me a message on Instagram one night. "I'm sorry he hurt you. You didn't deserve any of this." I cried harder at that than almost anything else. The final blow was the house. Mark fought for it, said it was his legacy that he put so much work into the renovations. But Rebecca proved every penny of those renovations came from money he'd hidden from me. The judge awarded me the house free and clear, plus enough in assets that I never had to work again if I didn't want to. I had the locks changed one last time, and then invited Emily and Ethan over for the first time. We walked through every room while I told them stories. Where we'd put the Christmas tree, the spot in the kitchen where he proposed again on our 10th anniversary. Ethan listened quietly, touching the walls like he was trying to understand the dad he thought he knew. Emily just held my hand. The day Mark came to pick up the few boxes the judge allowed him to have, I waited on the porch with Rebecca and a sheriff's deputy. He looked 10 years older, suit rumpled, eyes red. When he saw Emily's car in the driveway, he froze. "What is she doing here?" he whispered. I smiled for the first time in months. "She's helping me redecorate." He started to say something, my name maybe, an apology, maybe another lie. I didn't let him. "You don't get to speak to me anymore. You lost that right the first time you looked me in the eye and chose to lie. Goodbye, Mark." I closed the door while he stood there holding a cardboard box full of the life he'd thrown away. Yet even then, the hardest part wasn't destroying his lies. It was rebuilding myself from the ashes.
The first night in the house alone was the quietest of my life. No Mark humming in the shower, no TV murmuring from the living room, just the refrigerator humming and the occasional creak of old beams settling. I walked from room to room, turning on every light, like brightness could chase away 22 years of ghosts. I ended up on the back deck at 3 a.m, wrapped in a blanket, watching the lake behind our house reflect a sky full of stars I hadn't noticed in years. For the first time since opening that box, I breathed all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. I sold the house 3 months later, not because I couldn't afford to keep it, I could easily, but because every corner still smelled like him, like us, and I was done living in a museum of lies. I bought a small condo downtown, high floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place I'd always wanted, but Mark said was impractical. I filled it with plants, soft whites and grays, books I actually wanted to read. My sister helped me hang the first picture, a photo of me laughing on a hike in the Cascades last fall, taken by a stranger who saw how happy I looked that day. No Mark in the frame, just me. Therapy was brutal at first. I found a woman named Dr. Patel who didn't flinch when I said I sometimes wished he just disappeared instead of making me blow everything up. She made me say the ugly things out loud, the rage, the humiliation, the terrifying moments when I wondered if I'd ever trust anyone again, including myself. Week after week, I sat on her soft blue couch and peeled back layers I didn't know I had. One day I cried because I realized I'd spent 2 decades shrinking myself to keep him comfortable. The next week, I actually laughed when I told her I'd started dancing in my kitchen again to old Taylor Swift songs like I was 25. My friends were complicated. Some rallied immediately, showing up with wine and takeout and righteous anger on my behalf. Others got quiet, awkward, like betrayal might be contagious. A few even defended him at first. "He made one mistake, Sarah. People change." I let those people drift away without a fight. I didn't have the energy to teach grown adults basic decency. Family was harder. My mom kept saying, "But he was such a good provider." My brother asked if I was sure I hadn't overreacted. I stopped trying to convince them. Some people need the world to stay tidy, and I was no longer willing to fold myself small enough to fit their version of tidy. Emily and I kept talking. Not every day, but enough. She sent me a photo of Ethan's graduation invitation, cap and gown, that same crooked smile. I sent her a care package when she started nursing school at 42. Cozy socks, good coffee, a note that said, "You're already an incredible mom. Now go be incredible for you too." We never became best friends. Too much scar tissue for that. but we became something stronger. Two women who chose truth over comfort and survived it. Ethan messaged me sometimes, long, thoughtful paragraphs about college applications and how weird it felt to turn 18 without his dad in the stands. I always answered honestly, told him none of this was his fault, that he was allowed to love his dad and still be angry, that healing doesn't have a deadline. One night he called just to say thank you for not hating him. I cried after I hung up, but they were the good kind of tears, the kind that wash things clean. Mark tried one last time, of course, showed up at my new condo with flowers and that same hangdog look he'd perfected. Security buzzed me. I watched him on the camera pacing the lobby like a man waiting for absolution. I pressed the intercom button and said, "Go home, Mark," wherever that is now. He left the flowers with the doorman. I had them sent to a nursing home down the street. Seemed fitting, something beautiful he'd never actually earned. I ran into him once after that, purely by accident, at the grocery store in Bellevue. He looked thin, older, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit right anymore. Our carts stopped side by side in the produce aisle, both of us reaching for the same bunch of bananas like some cosmic joke. He started to speak, my name, soft, pleading. I just looked at him, really looked, and felt nothing. Not hate, not love, just the quiet recognition of a chapter that had finally closed. "You okay?" he asked, voice cracking. I thought about it for a second. "Yeah, I really am." I put the bananas in my cart and walked away. That night, I opened a bottle of champagne on my balcony and toasted the city lights sparkling below. 47 years old, starting over, and for the first time in forever, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I thought closure would come from him, but it came from somewhere else entirely. A year later, I went back to the attic of the old house one last time. The new owners had already moved in, but they were kind enough to let me poke around for a few things I forgot. I climbed those familiar, creaky steps, carrying an empty cardboard box and a roll of fresh packing tape. The wooden box was still there, tucked in the same corner, waiting like it knew I'd return. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, and opened it again. Same faint scent of old perfume and paper, same letters, same photos, same tiny silver rattle. Only this time, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt grateful. That box didn't destroy my marriage. It ended a performance that had been running far too long. It handed me back the truth, raw and ugly as it was, and with it, the chance to finally become the woman I was always meant to be. Someone who chooses herself first, who knows her worth isn't measured by how long she can stay blind. I took every item out, one by one, and placed them gently into the new cardboard box, not to hide again, but to close the chapter with respect for the pain, for the lessons, for the little boy who never asked to be born into secrets. When the wooden box was empty, I ran my fingers over the brass hinges one last time, whispered, "Thank you," and sealed the new box shut with clean, strong tape. I left it on the attic floor with the note for the new owners. Some stories belong to the house now. Let it keep this one. Driving away that day, windows down, music loud, I realized the greatest revenge wasn't watching Mark lose everything he lied to protect. It was me gaining everything he never truly saw. My voice, my peace, my future. If you're listening to this and you've ever found your own hidden box, whether it's letters, lies, or just the quiet knowing that something's wrong, please hear me. Opening it will hurt like nothing else, but staying closed in the dark hurts longer. You are worth the truth. You are worth the mess. And on the other side of it, there's a life so bright it'll make the years you lost feel like a small price to pay. Thank you for letting me share this with you. If my story touched you even a little, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. Your city, your state, even your little corner of the planet. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than the secrets keeping them small, share this with them. We heal better together. See you in the next one.